Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Tonight on Farage, exclusive polling that shows the extent this government is in trouble with its own voters over the cross-channel emergency. Will Sunak be sunk by the migration problem is a debate we will have tonight. We'll look at a proposal not unique to this country to end all animal farming and turn us vegan. Is it really going to happen? Is it desirable? And on Talking Pints, I'll be joined by a man who's gone from sleeping rough to being a pensions advisor, and he's got a very dire warning for all of you under the age of 50 who still think you're going to get a state old age pension. All of that in just a few minutes, but first, let's get the news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story on GB News. 2 Metropolitan Police officers have been sentenced to 3 months in prison for sending grossly offensive messages in a WhatsApp group with Wayne Couzens before he murdered Sarah Everard. And a warning, the following does contain some flash photography. PC Jonathan Cobban and former PC Joel Borders shared messages of a racist, homophobic and misogynistic nature in the group in 2019. The pair have been bailed ahead of an appeal against their convictions at the High Court. The Prime Minister has urged police chiefs to take action to change the culture within the police force after a report found serious failures in vetting officers and staff. After examining 8 forces, the police watchdog found officers who'd previously been convicted of domestic abuse or accused of sexual assault were taken on and employed. It says it found a common culture of misogyny, sexism and predatory behaviour towards female police officers. The report author, Inspector of Constabulary Matt Parr, told GB News the findings are disappointing.
Is vetting strict enough? And the answer is no. That means there's a too great a chance of the wrong people joining. Secondly, did the police deal with misconduct strictly enough? The answer to that is also no. That means too many of the wrong people are allowed to stay in the forces. And thirdly, what is a culture of misogyny and sexualised, predatory sometimes behaviour towards women, like in policing? And the answer to that is not good at all.
In other news tonight, Rishi Sunak has conceded not enough asylum claims have been processed, but he says action is being taken to fix that. Mr Sunak, who's been under pressure to sack his Home Secretary Suella Braverman, defended her during Prime Minister's questions in the Commons today, saying they're both on the same page when it comes to tackling migration. Labour, meanwhile, have accused the Conservatives of breaking the asylum system. The Home Secretary is being warned that Kent is at breaking point as a result of the migrant crisis. The leaders of 14 councils have written to Suella Braverman, advising her of the risk of far-right violence at the overcrowded Manston Processing Centre. Today, a young girl threw a message in a bottle over the fence at the facility, writing about the conditions inside. The note said there were pregnant women and sick detainees, and 50 families had been held for more than 30 days. The United States is accusing North Korea of covertly supplying Russia with a significant number of artillery shells for its war in Ukraine. The White House says Pyongyang is trying to obscure the shipments by funneling them through countries in the Middle East and North Africa. In September, North Korea said it had never supplied Russia with weapons or ammunition and had no plans to do so. Meanwhile, after suspending shipments, Russia has now announced it'll resume its participation in the UN-brokered Black Sea deal to export grain. That's the news. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where now it's time for Farage.
Good evening. Well, let me tell you, all over the country today, there have been a series of incidents that highlight just how much of an emergency what is happening in the English Channel is becoming. Not just the conditions at Manston, and boy, the government must be relieved that it's blowing southerly gales every day this week. It must have eased at least a little bit of the pressure. But let's start with what happened this afternoon at a hotel in Essex, a Holiday Inn in Essex. I'm about to show you some pictures on the screen, and it's quite extraordinary, really. A travelling salesman or woman, but that Holiday Inn is not good enough for those that have crossed the English Channel in a boat, and they're protesting they want better food and better conditions. I'm not sure the Savoy would make some of these people happy. I found that unbelievable. Then we go up to the Wirral. I mentioned the Wirral last night. I mentioned the fact the chief executive had sent out an email saying to councillors that they would now have to take their burden of Albanians, having already had migrant hotels in the town. Almost unbelievably, and really you couldn't make this next story up, a group of RNLI volunteers were staying up in Hoylake. The reason is they've got an inshore hovercraft there. They were being trained in its use. Whilst they were out on exercise, their belongings in their hotels were packed into suitcases. The suitcases left in reception. Another hotel in the area booked for them. And the reason they've been turfed out is because 40 Albanians have been moved into the hotel. The very organisation that helped to get these people across the English Channel have now lost their hotel rooms in favour of Albanians. And then I saw this, a tweet put out by a Radio Kent producer. We have hundreds of mostly Albanian service users not claiming asylum, being bailed and dropped at mid-Kent train stations with no follow-up where they go or if they leave Kent. And I'm told, no proper security checks on who they are. They've come into the country, they haven't claimed asylum, they've been bailed and literally dumped at train stations in mid-Kent. And all of this, by the way, all of this I've learned in the course of the last 2 hours. And finally, a letter from a chief executive of Kent County Council and of Medway too, and indeed signed by all of the council leaders in Kent, talking about conditions. And there is a line in this letter that sticks very firmly in my mind. It says, put simply, Kent is at breaking point. That's a phrase that I warned of in the referendum 6 years ago and was thoroughly vilified for doing. Put simply, Kent is at breaking point. And just an example of that, just one little example of that in a very comprehensive letter. Secondary schools in Canterbury and Ashford currently have no year 7 places, year 7 to 9 places available for local children. So there are places available to children put on dinghies that cross the English Channel, but if you live in Ashford, if you live in Canterbury, you will not be getting your kid educated in a local school. I hope those 4 little examples of what I've learned just this afternoon about what's going on around this country makes you realise that this is now genuinely an emergency. And my audience question for you is, will Sunak be sunk by the migrant crisis? Farage at gbnews.uk. Well, I've been promising you all day some exclusive polling, and here he is, Professor Matthew Goodwin from the University of Kent. And Matt, you've been out polling this issue.
Yeah.
What have you found?
Well, we found that most of the country think the government is no longer in control of Britain's borders. Nearly 60% of British adults say the government is no longer in control. 3/4 of Conservatives, 3/4 of Leavers. This, to me, actually takes us back to the early 2010s when public confidence in the immigration system basically collapsed. And I think, in a way, we're right back there.
Yes, I mean, public loss of faith over borders, but also over sheer numbers coming into Britain. And you've just heard me talk about, schools in Kent having no places for certain years. A lot of that led, didn't it, to the momentum for a referendum and indeed the result of the referendum. So if 3/4 of Conservative voters think we've lost control of our borders, where does that put Rishi Sunak as our new Prime Minister in the eyes of the public?
I think it puts Rishi Sunak in a very difficult position because the migration flows, as you've just said, are changing rapidly. I was struck listening to Dan O'Mahony speak to the Home Affairs Committee this week.
He's the Channel Task Force commander.
He's the Channel Task Force commander in the Home Office, and his point to me was sobering. He said, look, Albanians are the largest group within all of the groups that are crossing the Channel. And he was very explicit. He said, actually, this isn't about genuine asylum. This is about organised criminality. And I decided to poll the question this week, and we found that over 60% of people in Britain say, let's send Albanians back immediately, because I think, from their perspective, Albania is not in a war. There's no major conflict. It's joining the European Union. It's in formal talks as of this summer to join the European Union.
It's a NATO member.
And I think, on the one hand, we've got evidence showing that the British people are incredibly tolerant. They are welcoming of genuine refugees, Ukrainians, for example. But they are, on the other hand, clearly feeling and thinking that they're being taken for a ride.
Maybe the most significant figure there is that only 13% think Albanians should stay. And about 13% of the population think there should be no such thing as countries, no such thing as borders, and unlimited free movement of people. So that's obviously a very, the Albanian thing, clearly a very, very big issue. And, over 80% of Leave voters think they should just go. I mean, that the airstrip at Manston should be used effectively. What about the implications for the Conservative Party, for the Conservative Party leadership? Does the public have confidence, any confidence, that they're going to solve this?
I think this could be the end game for the Conservative Party. I think if they don't get their hands around this issue, this is going to be the final nudge that people need to not switch to Labour, but to stay at home and say, I've had it with all of these parties. We actually asked people this week, we said, who do you think would best manage this issue? The most popular answer was none of the above. The second most popular answer was you. The third most popular answer was Keir Starmer.
Wow.
And the fourth most popular answer was Rishi Sunak. Now, historically, the Conservative Party has owned immigration. Go back to the 90s, 2000s. You remember as well as I do, this was the Conservative Party issue. Here's the problem. The Conservative Party no longer owns immigration. That is a huge problem for Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party, because if they've got no way of pulling these voters back, as you saw at PMQs today...
Every question from Starmer at PMQs today was on this issue.
Keir Starmer is presenting himself like Tony Blair did in the late 90s, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. Keir Starmer is now saying, I'm tough on migration, I'm tough on the causes of migration.
I don't believe a word of it, by the way, and I don't think he'd be any better than the Conservatives and possibly even worse. But the point you're making is that disenchantment with the Conservatives, if they don't solve this, could lead many to stay at home.
I'm worried about where we're heading as a country, actually. I think if we don't get our hands around this issue, look at Sweden, look at Italy, look at America, midterms next week. Border crises create enormous panic. They create concern, and they will disrupt the political order. And if Sunak doesn't deal with this, if he doesn't reform the Modern Slavery Act, if he doesn't reconsider our relationship with the European Convention on Human Rights, if he doesn't think about the Rwanda deal and expanding that to other countries and so on and so forth, my worry is that we are going to end up in the place that these other countries have ended up, with a much more polarised politics. And this is make or break for the Conservative Party, because if they can't control this issue, what other issue are they controlling?
Quick last thought, if I may. Midterms on Tuesday in America. Are the Republicans heading for their best midterm results since 1920?
Look, I'm a pollster. I'm very sceptical of the argument that the polls a few weeks ago were suggesting a Democrat bounce. I think we're heading for a red wave. I think the question is, how big is that red wave? I think if it is bigger than the polls suggest, I think probably Trump announces the day after the midterms. And I think we're probably then going to end up in a 2-year conversation about, is Trump going to take on Biden? Watch the Senate. The polls in the Senate have been narrowing. If the Republicans end up taking the House and putting up a much stronger fight in the Senate than people think, I think actually 2024 is going to end up being a vintage year for political anoraks.
It's going to be fascinating. And I'm going to be there next week in America, reporting live to you here on GB News, those midterm results. Matthew Goodwin, thank you very much indeed. Well, you heard what the professor said there, that this could be the end game for the Conservatives unless they get a grip on this issue. And hey, we had Priti Patel as Home Secretary talking tough year after year, but effectively delivering nothing. We've now got Suella Braverman talking tough, but can she deliver? Frankly, when so many in her own party don't appear to be behind her. We've had MPs openly condemning her, some Tory MPs even calling for more migrant hotels to be booked to ease the pressure on Manston. Is this the end game for the Conservative Party? I'll tell you what, if it is, the red wall is gone. Well, let's put all of this to James Daly, Tory Member of Parliament for Bury North. James, you saw the reports from today, Kent County Council, we are at breaking point.
It's a scandal. It's absolutely appalling. There's no other word for it. And we, Conservative members of Parliament recognise that, understand that. We think we've got the Home Secretary who's got the I know Suella very well. She's got the determination. She wants to solve this problem. She wants to come up with a radical solution to it, to take the action that's needed. And that's why people like me are backing her. I haven't heard, you know more people than me, Nigel, but I haven't heard these Conservative MPs who are saying things, about Suella or being negative about her. The friends that I have are all 1,000% behind her and want her to go out there and take and we could talk all day about this, but the radical action that is needed to, when people come, to get them out straight away. No messing about.
James, that's fine.
Yeah.
We've had this with Priti Patel. She took her position in August 2019. Yeah. Before that big Conservative victory, she talked tough all the way through and delivered nothing. And actually, if you overpromise to the public and underdeliver, they really don't like you for doing that. Do you actually think, whatever Suella believes in, do you actually think that the leadership of this government are going to give her the tools to do the job?
I think so. I was with the Prime Minister last night. He's not given me... The Prime Minister is a... Politicians always say this, Nigel, but I'm just being straight with you. He's a good man. He's a decent man. He looks you straight in the eye and he tells you what he's going to do. We asked about this situation. I have full confidence in him. I have full confidence in this Home Secretary. I don't think we underestimate... I don't know whether you call it the blob or whatever it is. Yeah. The general national, should we say, centre-left media... the funny thing about this place where we sat here in London is I come down here and it seems a distant land away from where I represent.
Is it not more disconnected on this issue than it's ever been?
Completely. I think there's a determination by this sort of group of people who generally run our country behind the scenes to try and stop this Home Secretary in particular from taking the action that they know that she will take. I can't believe, Nigel, I can't believe, I was looking at the headline in the Times the other day, they were complaining about the words that Suella was using. You've just highlighted that we've got people running amok in the channel. We've got 12,000 Albanians coming over this year. We've got kids who can't go to school. We've got all sorts of things happening. And all the national media can do is concentrate on words used in Parliament.
I get all of that. Yeah. Two final thoughts. One, do we need to leave ECHR?
I think we're getting to the point where we're going to have to think very strongly about that. I was, as a lawyer, as somebody who believes in that, I've always been very reluctant in respect of that, but the situation is too serious. We're spending £5.6 million a day on hotels just to house small boat crossing asylum seekers. Something has got to happen to protect the country's national interest and our security interest.
Final thought. If this isn't sorted, is Rishi Sunak toast, and will you lose your seat?
The second one is people should not vote. I would encourage people not to vote for me if they don't think that I have been part of a government that's delivered on the manifesto and whatever it is that we're going to do. I think, obviously, the situation is that for the Conservative government, if we don't get on top of this, things are going to be a lot more difficult. But don't let's kid ourselves, Nigel. And the whole time I've been an MP, I've not received one email or correspondence about Keir Starmer. The Labour Party are fully in favour of open-door immigration, this nonsense that we're hearing now.
I know.
If they were in charge, Nigel, the situation will be 10 times worse.
But you know what? I think we've had enough of being told vote Conservative because the other lot are worse. I think we're bored with it. And, you say things will be a lot more difficult if it's not sorted out. That's the understatement of the day. Professor Goodwin says it could be the end game for the Conservative.
Not a chance, Nigel.
Well, there you are. The optimism of sitting MPs is quite wonderful.
Reality.
In a moment, we talk ONS figures. Yeah, really interesting, fascinating ONS figures. I do hope Nick Robinson from the BBC is watching this next bit. And we'll talk about should we get rid of all farmed animals in this country. That should be a very good debate.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel. So, are Sunak and Tories sunk on this issue? Some of your responses. Anonymous says, regardless, Sunak was sunk on immigration before he even made it to number 10. We all knew he was going to be soft on the invasion. And so far he has been, that word now strongly part of the English parlance, I believe. Mason says, this is precisely why I have had round-the-clock close protection detail since January. London is terribly infested with gangs of illegal aliens on a crime spree. Well, they're quite strong words there, but I do understand exactly what you are driving at. Kevin says, yes, if they don't act. This is a massive vote winner for the party that puts a stop to the invasion. Again, the use of that word. Majority of voters, this is top of what needs sorting out. Absolutely right. And finally, Chris says, they have no intention of solving this deliberate disaster, not even a sniff at leaving the ECHR. And you're right, Chris, immediately we have to leave the ECHR. Well, I say immediately, it'll take time, but signal the intent. We have to get rid of the Modern Slavery Act, another one of Mrs. May's poison pills to British politics, and those things would at least be a start. Now, let's go more broadly into immigration numbers, because we've got the census figures that are out, and Alp Mehmet, chairman of Migration Watch, joins me. We must begin with these official figures, not by the way that everyone fills in census forms, because some people don't want to be found, but we've got the numbers we've got. We must begin with Romanians, because I said, you know, in 2013-14, that by opening the door to Romania, I thought it was reasonable to expect that up to 250,000 could come. I mean, goodness me, you would have thought I'd advocated killing the firstborn. And a few months on, there were some figures, and Nick Robinson crowed on the BBC's Today's programme that no one's come. Who was right, who was wrong about numbers coming from Romania?
You and I were right, Nigel. In fact,
actually, we were wrong. We were wrong.
We underestimated, and we always err on the side of caution at Migration Watch, as you know.
Yeah.
And we thought it would be probably around 50,000 a year. In fact, it was a lot more than that. We've now got over 500,000 Romanians, up from 80,000 it was in 2013. It's now something like 540,000, if not more.
Yeah.
Huge increase, and it was obvious, frankly. Having lived and worked in Romania, for me, it was obvious what was going to happen. But everyone at the time said, no, it won't. Well, it did.
I'm sure many of them, by the way, are very good people, working hard, obeying the law, but that's not the point. We are talking here on the ONS, we're talking about numbers. Overall, Al, what has the increase over the last decade, over these last 2 decades, what has the increase been in the foreign-born population living here?
Well, figures issued today from the Office of National Statistics. In 20 years, the non-UK born population has gone from 4.2 million to, guess what, 10 million. 10 million people. Over the last 10 years, the ONS says it's risen by 2.5 million. Well, it depends which figures you look at, because if you look at those who were here, left briefly and came back, it actually goes up to 4.2 million. We've got an increase in population of 3.5 million over the last 10 years. Most of that is the result of immigration. That's not sensible, for goodness sake. We've got to bring it under control, not stop it, but we need to bring it under control if we want those who come here actually to integrate, to get on with life in this country. That is impossible.
And it impacts on school places. We're seeing that in Kent
school places,
today.
on the health service, on housing. It impacts on everything if you have population increase, largely because of immigration, at the sort of pace that we've had it. We've got to bring it under control.
I agree with you. And folks, remember that in successive manifesto after manifesto, and they've been in power now, the Conservatives, since 2010, but in manifesto after manifesto, they promised net migration would be tens of thousands a year. Instead, we hear from Out Mehmet that up to 4.2 million extra people have come and settled in this country since the Conservative Party took power. 4.2 million. You have to ask yourself a question. When they make those pledges at election time, are they saying it because they simply think it's what you want to hear? Have they been honest and straight with you on this issue? I don't believe they have. Out Mehmet, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Indeed. Now, moving on to a different issue, but an issue that is becoming more and more prevalent. You may have seen in the Netherlands recently there have been some quite major protests by farmers. They're being told that they've got to cut down the amount of livestock. And I find this extraordinary. But animal charity PETA, very well funded animal charity PETA, have put out today this video, and this is their thoughts on the future of British farming.
When you hear British farming, what comes to mind? Hard work, honest work, bringing wholesome, nutritious food to your family's table. For me, it's this. Drinking this milk supports British farmers, and not just any kind of milk. This is oat milk, dairy-free, high in fibre, and full of goodness. From oats grown right here in Britain. It's time for a new type of farming. Farming that's good for farmers, gentler on the planet, and gentler on animals. Plant-based farming, vegan farming.
Well, there we are. There is the pro-vegan farming propaganda put out by PETA. But I'm joined, because we like to have all shades of opinion on this programme, and Jennifer White is Media and Communications Manager for PETA. Now, let's begin with something slightly trivial. Oat milk. I mean, I've put it in my tea. It's horrible, isn't it?
Absolutely not. You've clearly just not tried the right one. I swear there is a plant milk out there for everyone. And that's what PETA's video is celebrating. It's farmers who are growing crops, who are growing the oat milk that so many people do enjoy having in their coffees. In fact, 50% of the population almost is ordering a plant milk in their coffee at coffee shops these days.
I mean, if you want to be vegan, That's up to you. Completely up to you. But what you're doing with the money that you've got, and you're a very well-funded organisation. I mean, you once gave Tony Blair £1 million towards his election campaign. You're a big, strong organisation. What you're trying to do is to change the lifestyle of the rest of us, isn't it?
Well, what we're trying to do is improve the future of Britain's farmers. You know, the situation is not looking great for the future of farmers at the moment, because they're needing to adapt with the times more, because the future is plant-based, and it's time for farmers to turn their back on the heartbreak and violence of slaughtering animals.
Hang on. You know, sheep meat price is actually quite good at the moment. There's a very large number of people in Britain eat sheep meat on a regular basis. I think the sheep farmers are having quite a good time.
Well, I'm not quite sure what your sources are for that one, but if we look at all the other aspects, the future of the planet, we know that farming animals is single-handedly contributing to some of the worst effects of climate change. We know that billions of animals are suffering, living miserable lives, being put to slaughter. We know that disease is rampant throughout all of these industries at the moment. Bird flu is, you know...
Bird flu? I've seen gannets, dead gannets, floating down the English Channel. Quite a distressing sight.
Well,
actually.
absolutely, and imagine what it's like.
That has got nothing to do with turkey farming in East Anglia, has it?
Oh, well, just imagine what it is like for the farmers who have to witness this death and suffering day in and day out. It is a dirty and cruel business, and it takes a toll on
So you're trying to
people's
protect
mental
the
health.
farmers?
Well, we're trying to back British farming, but farmers who are farming crops. That is what we're celebrating, and that is what the future is. We are going in a plant-based direction.
Farmers are proud. Dairy farmers are proud of their milk products, of their cream, of their butter, of their cheeses.
Well, a recent study revealed that 92% of farmers under 40 cited that poor mental health was one of the worst things that they were up against at the moment. And you can see why, when they're having to mutilate animals on a daily basis, cutting off pigs' tails, chopping the beaks off chickens, having to witness all of these...
We have been farming animals for hundreds of thousands of years. And I know plenty of people in the farming community who look after their animals incredibly well. So you literally want us to stop eating steak, to stop buying dairy milk.
Absolutely, but just look at what the consumer demand is at the moment.
This is really extreme stuff. I mean, you are a very extremist organisation.
Well, there's a lot of things that we've done throughout history that we are not doing today, because traditions change, culture changes, society changes, and we know that savvy farmers are going to move with the times, and we've already seen it. We've seen farmers who decided that they didn't want to be complicit in that cruelty anymore, and they have sent their cows to a sanctuary instead.
I'm really sorry. To say that farmers are complicit in cruelty is quite an insult to many farmers that will be watching this programme, because they're not complicit. They are not complicit in cruelty. They care for their animals very, very well. It's not fair to insult farmers in that way.
Well, it's definitely not insulting them, but how would you describe sending an animal who you'd reared from birth to a slaughterhouse where they're going to be strung up and shot through the head with a bolt gun? If that's not being complicit in something, I'm not quite sure what is.
Well, those animals wouldn't have existed had it not been for the meat industry.
Yeah, and they probably would have been glad for that, because their lives have been so miserable.
So what do we do? Do we now just slaughter all the stock? Is that what you'd like?
No, of course not. We're not saying that this is something that is going to happen overnight. This is something that is going to take time. And of course, it will give farmers time to transition as well. This is all about supply and demand. And of course, the less people who are drinking cow's milk, the less cows that need to be bred in order to produce it, and therefore they can turn to farming crops.
This is a real sort of North London, upper middle class.
I'm from Edinburgh.
wealthy, extreme view of the world that you want to impose upon everybody else. And I don't think everybody else wants it. And even the climate change argument. What is the point of any of this when the Chinese are building 80 new coal-fired power stations every year?
Well, I mean, what the Chinese are doing is out of my remit, but to think that you can't make a difference is not the right way to think about things. We all have a personal responsibility, and we can all make kinder choices by having plant-based milks, having vegan cheese, having a plant-based steak.
But we don't want to.
So many people do want to. You just don't want to yet, but there is still time. I wish I brought some things on for you to try.
No, listen, I get the passion. I mean, I think it's crackers, but I get the passion, and you believe in this, and I know that. Final thought. Driven bird shooting and angling, are they to be banned as well?
Absolutely. Of course they're meant to be banned.
I rest my case. I rest my case. They are a small extremist clique, but they believe in what they believe in. And, to be fair, there's a growing number of people who are going vegan. There's a growing number of people who are going for these options, and I understand that. And I respect that, which is why we have civilised debate on these issues. Now, in a moment, we've got a heck of a story for you. We really, really do, because Peter Komalafe was living rough on the streets, had a very, very tough start in life. But he's gone on to be a big success. He's now a pensions advisor. And what he has to say about the prospects of anybody out there under 50 getting an old age pension needs listening to. He'll be my guest on Talking Pints.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio, and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, some pretty hard politics tonight on the show. It is time to have, I think, a little bit more of a leisurely look at the world. Peter Komalafe joins me as my guest on Talking Pints. Peter, welcome to the programme. Now, to say that your start in life was a little checkered would perhaps be a bit of an understatement without going through the whole thing. As I understand it, you finished up pretty much penniless as a rough sleeper.
Yeah, yeah. My parents came over in the 1970s roughly, and they put me in foster care from 3 months to 8 years old. I was then taken back to Nigeria for 10 years, sent back in 1998, given £50. And yeah, from that point onwards, a little bit of chaos ensued and uncertainty and just trying to find my way through life, really. So hard lessons, but lessons that have paid their dividends.
People who finish up sleeping rough, how do they get out of it? How did you get out of it?
It's really, really hard, actually, to be honest, because if I go back to that phase, I was sleeping on the streets. I didn't have a forwarding address. So
you can't get a job.
You can't get a job. You can't get anything. I had a fortunate moment where someone found me sleeping on the streets and basically said, look, you can't sleep here. It was a November evening, really, really cold.
Yeah.
Come with me and, you know, sleep on my sofa. And they took me in for, I think it was about 3 weeks or so, and it allowed me to get myself on my feet.
Heck of a risk they took. You could have been anybody.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, when you're sleeping rough, the first thing that went through my mind was, I don't know who this guy is, so I don't know where he's going to take me.
For you as well.
100%.
Yeah.
I don't know where he's going to take me. And naturally, when you're sleeping on the street, people don't treat you the best. So I already had some really nasty experiences, but at that point, it was down to desperation, really. So
do you get much abuse sleeping on the streets?
Yeah. I mean, because people look at you as though you're the architect of that situation. And in my case,
through drink and drugs,
drug, that kind of stuff. I mean, I've never done drugs. I drink very occasionally.
Only on talking pints.
Only on talking pints. I drink very occasionally.
Yeah.
So, and it was, what got me there was just a conspiring circumstances that got me there. And so, yeah, you don't necessarily trust people. You're always worried. You've got your guard up. But like I said, I was very, very lucky that this guy
somebody out of the blue gives you a break.
Absolutely. And sometimes that's what you need in life. You need people who are willing to show kindness and actually.
And so from that, you've now got an address.
Yes.
You get a job.
Yeah.
Why financial services?
Financial services was a complete and utter mistake.
From where you were to...
It was a complete and utter mistake, Nigel. I told this story a number of times, and I was on job seekers allowance at the time.
Yeah.
And the rule was back then, you had to prove that you were showing initiative to get off job seekers, off the dole. And this guy said to me, look, there's a job for a building society, you need to go to it. And I was like, well, at that point, I was heavily in debt because a byproduct of being homeless, I couldn't feed myself, but I did have a checkbook, so I used to bounce checks. So I owed banks money. And I said, well, it's a bank. I don't necessarily want to go to that interview. He goes, you have to, or we're going to take you off benefits. And so I went to this interview and I was wearing a leather jeans jacket, tried to sabotage it as much as I possibly could. But luckily, the lady who was interviewing me, Jenny Berry, she saw something in me, she gave me my first job. And really, the rest is history. I've been in it for 15 years now.
Yeah, and you've gone through banking and investment management and all of those things. Yeah. But you've now, since 2020, taken a different, charting a very different course.
Yeah.
And interestingly, you know, your own website, podcast, Conversation of Money.
Yeah.
I've done something similar, not as full on as you're doing, but from what I can see, you're basically trying to explain to people that financial services isn't some myth, and that you can be in control of your own future.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when I started in banking, it was alien to me, right? You're talking about, so I never got any financial education at home. I certainly didn't get it in school.
No.
So all of a sudden I'm thrust into this environment where I'm learning things about credit cards and credit scores. And I certainly get into Canary Wharf in 2012, and I'm learning about the pension world and in the investment world. And I'm thinking, I wish I knew all this stuff when I was in my 20s. And so in 2020, I actually took the step to start a YouTube channel and to start a podcast to try and share some of the stuff that I've learned through 15 years qualifying as a financial advisor, because I think ultimately we all have a responsibility to take charge of our own financial situation.
I do too, but interestingly, most people say, it's too complicated, it's too difficult, I don't understand it, I'm going to give it all to somebody. Somebody who charges you a percentage, which over the course of 20 years or 30 years takes away almost a third of your money.
Have you had a financial advisor?
Well, I tell you something. When I got elected to the European Parliament, I had my own private pension pot, and I left it to the industry to manage. And frankly, if you look at some of the compounded fees, you start to ask yourself some very, very real questions about this. I mean, the industry always wins. This is what people forget. So, and by the way, there are some great people in the industry too. I'm not slagging off the entirety of our financial industry and our pensions industry, but building that knowledge, building your own future is really, really important. And it's really, really important. And, you know, you've developed this, you know, been on Channel 4 and ITV and GB News and in the press, and this is what you do now.
Yeah.
You know, at a moment when people are facing
cost of living crisis, yeah.
Very, very straitened times. But the big message of yours that I really wanted to share, you know, with this audience on TV and radio is your view about the future of governments paying old age pensions. So, Peter, give it to us straight between the eyes.
Look, I just think the current situation with the state pension is unattainable. And we're seeing this at the moment with what's being debated with the budget to come in a couple of weeks' time. And the question is, you know, when you look at the state pension and how it's actually funded, it's funded from the tax take. Is it sustainable moving forward? My thinking is that actually it's not. It is the largest proportion of the welfare system check payments that we pay.
So basically, just to try and simplify this. Yeah. So the money from the old age pensions isn't something invested on behalf of, it's taken out of that year's income.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone who's working currently paying tax is essentially funding state pension right now for those people who are already retired enjoying the state pension. And that is simply it's unsustainable. Now, what happened in 2012 was the government started to roll out auto-enrollment, which meant that if you're working for an employer, they have to pay into a pension pot for you. And that is foreshadowing potential changes in the future to say, look, the state pension is not sustainable long-term. We need you to take the onus for your own retirement.
And of course, the boomers.
Yes.
The boomers are hitting, we're sort of about midway through, the boomers hitting 65, 66 years old.
Life expectancy has increased as well.
And life expectancies, I mean, I was born in 64. I'm the last of the boomers and the biggest of the boomer years. Now, I get all of that. So is the stark message to anybody under 50, anybody under 40 certainly, is the stark message that you're probably not going to get an old age pension? Is that what you're saying?
I think we should all look at the state pension as a bonus to private pension or self-funded pensions that we decide to take on our own, and not as something that we rely upon, because it is unlikely that if things carry on as they are, it is unlikely the state pension is going to be around. So you have to take ownership for your own pension provisions.
But there'll be people watching this right now who will say, you know, we've got 2 kids, we've got a mortgage, that cost has risen quite sharply over the last few months, and we've got a probable further interest, or almost certain further interest rate rise coming tomorrow. We can barely afford to live a decent life now. How the hell, Peter, can we start putting money aside for a pension?
If you're working in a business as an employee, you've already pretty much done it as long as you're opted into the auto-enrollment.
The company scheme.
Yeah, just continue doing the company scheme and pay attention to that scheme. You know, you don't want to go into the default option that they typically put you in. Pay attention to it. Really try to. Education is really, really important. I think the sooner we're able to inform people and educate people about how these things work, people can make better decisions. I mean, that's why I started doing what I do. It's because knowledge is effectively power. Knowledge applied is even more power. But if you don't know that something exists and something is possible, how do you know to pursue it? How do you know that it's something that is an option for you?
Final thought, but a very important one. As we look into 2023, and economic forecasters are often famously wrong, but I think it's quite realistic to think that a government rising taxes and business taxes as we go into a recession is likely to mean quite a big slowdown coming next year. Well, we can't predict the gas prices, but we hope very much they keep on coming down. How pessimistic are you about the British economy looking ahead?
I think we're in for a really, really tough ride. I think a slowdown at this point is inevitable. We can't really avoid it. The question is going to be, in the budget that gets announced in a couple of weeks' time, are they going to take any tangible measurements that will move us forward, or at least give us the confidence that we can move forward? I'm an optimist. I'm a half is full type guy. So I always try to think about the things that we can do to, I guess, cushion ourselves for hardship moving forward. There is no doubt, though, there is some hardship coming down the line. And it's all about trying to make sure that in your personal finance, you've got as much control as possible.
Peter Komalafe, thank you for joining me on Talking Points. And the message, I think, folks, from Peter is very clear. No specific investment advice. We're not allowed to do that on this programme. But taking control of your own money, your own life, your own destiny, understanding what investment is something you can do, and it's not as hard as you think. Thank you for joining me on Talking Points.
Thank you. Cheers, Nigel. Thank you.
We have a couple of moments left for Barrage to Farage. I've no idea what you've sent me today, but here goes. Right. Class says, why don't the government sue the French government for allowing illegal immigrants into the channel using ECHR? That's a very complicated question. We can't sue the French government. After all, we've given the French government hundreds of millions of pounds to police better, to fence better, to stop vast numbers coming. And it's so easy to give the French a kicking. It's all the French's fault. They don't care. But actually, as I've said again and again, the 70 miles of beach off which those boats are launching, there are hundreds of square miles of sand dunes. To stop any boat from launching, you would need tens of thousands of men and actually a budget of billions, all right? The reason people are coming is not because the French don't stop them, but because they see this as the land of four-star hotels and the land of milk and honey. Let's move on. Robert says, how accurate is the census in your opinion? I don't know. Stats, the census. I was talking about the census figures and the number of foreign-born living here and all the rest of it. I'm guessing a lot of people will just not sign a census form. What do you think?
I think so. I think there will be a few people who won't bother. So, yeah.
Just want to be outside the system, outside the tax, living effectively in the illegal economy. So, look, it's very, very difficult to predict. I think, the 1911 census people would have filled in, I think, but I suspect there are 2 or 3 million at least more people living in this country than will be shown up in those census figures. That is my guess. It's a guess. I don't know, but I bet you I'm not far from the mark. And one last thought. Robert says, the Labour Party have strongly attacked the government on the issue of illegal immigration. Does that open the door for the Tories to do something radical about it? Robert, the idea of this Conservative government doing anything radical about it, well, if they want to save their own skins, maybe they will. But I don't see it, because one of the big challenges is ECHR. And to leave that raises all the same emotions, all the same arguments, all the same rows, all the same divisions as Brexit itself. If Sunak is a very brave man, he will do it. And he might just save the party at the election. But I bet you he ain't going to do it. I'll be with you tomorrow night, live at 7 o'clock from Stoke-on-Trent with a full house of GB News viewers. But for now, I'll hand you over to Mark Stein.
Thanks a lot, Nigel. Great show. And I'm with you. The 1911 census was a lot more accurate than this new one. I would bet on that. We're going to keep this talk going about migrants and attendant issues, including the census and the huge lack of children in the United Kingdom. A lot of big subjects coming up after the weather.
Hello, Aidan McGibbon here with the latest forecast from the Met Office. Certainly been another unsettled day across the UK. Wind and rain has swept in from the west. That clears through overnight, but it lingers in the southeast, and then further blustery showers arrive, hot on the heels of this area of weather fronts and low pressure towards the northwest of the UK. Squeezing the isobars actually overnight will lead to strengthening winds once again for western Scotland, 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts for the Western Isles, and further heavy rain at times as well. A gap in between across northern and western England as well as Wales, but by the end of the night the heavy rain is there across East Anglia and the southeast. Some particularly wet weather to come